Teferi is one of the most powerful and well-known planeswalkers in all of Magic the Gathering. But when we first encounter him in the story, he's actually just a 14-year-old boy who is very much out of his element. He is studying on the Isle of Teleria, which is a secluded, magically shrouded island that is difficult to get to. The academy that he is going to is for prodigies, people who are very powerful in the magical arts. And Teferi definitely falls into that category, actually being the most brilliant and powerful student at the entire Tolarian Academy. And this academy is full of students that have been pulled from all over the place by an even more powerful planeswalker by the name of Urza. He is currently using the name Malzra in the story, but he has brought Teferi to this academy where he has been for up to 4 years at this point. Now, Teferi he's found a way to kind of settle into the academy. He has stood out amongst his peers and is essentially the leader of his own little mini group of, I guess, nuisances would be the way to put it. Teferi has ego issues. He is very aware of how clever he is. He knows that he's brilliant, and he also has magical powers that most people don't possess. Combine that with the fact that he's 14 years old, and at 14 years old, most people aren't that super mature. You have an individual who's going to be quite annoying to deal with and still like so powerful, but the sensibility still somewhat of a child. For example, when he meets Karn originally, one of the first things he tries to do is use the equivalent of a magical joy buzzer on Karn. It just basically sends a little jolt into the palm of your hand, but it's enough to knock most people off their feet, which kind of shows the contempt in some ways that Teferi has for other people. He genuinely doesn't value other individuals on the same level that he does himself. He's puffed up by his own pride, and he wanders the school with an array of crystals and wands and other sort of magical devices. He basically leads this entire little group of almost sycophantic children who look up to and suck up to him. So obviously that leads to an exacerbation of the already ego issues that are residing within Teferi. Now, I mean, he genuinely is a magical prodigy, so to a degree it's understandable how he got to that point. But unfortunately, in the beginning of the story, he does show that he is quite immature. When he first encounters Karn, actually being the first human outside of the creators of Karn for Karn to interact with, Teferi ends up calling him Artie Shovelhead and essentially doing other things, making fun of him. He taught Karn the meaning of irritation. Now, Teferi demonstrates his intelligence in the beginning of the story by showing us in different ways that he has a deeper understanding of what's going on at the Tolarian Academy. The meals that are served there are very bland meals, and Teferi has discerned that that is actually done intentionally. Master Malzra, otherwise known as Urza, the planeswalker who presides over the entire place, has decided to provide them with very nourishing but very bland food so that students will essentially use the food to fuel themselves, but not spend time dallying, daydreaming about the food, wasting their time in the cafeteria trying to get more food, things of that nature. And that is also reflective of how Malzra, the man in charge of this entire operation, kind of views people in some way like machinery. And Teferi has discerned this. He's able to show us all of that as he takes Karn on a tour of Teleria. Funnily enough, Karn and Teferi will end up being friends in the first place, but at this point, Karn absolutely detests Teferi. He cannot stand Teferi, as Teferi is constantly just playing pranks on him and using him to try and boost his own standing amongst his people, where basically he'll have his little gang of people and he'll just, check it out, I can levitate different buns up into Karn's head, all kind of silly nonsense like that. That is obviously very demeaning for Karn, and again, illustrative of Teferi's mindset about the beginning. Teferi hates the fact that he has to do scribe work, where there's all these students are involved in different arcane portions of what's going on with the overall plan of Urza. The Tolarian Academy exists unknown to the students. It exists to study the effects of time travel, time magics, that sort of thing. So everything that's done there is done in that regard. And Teferi has not sussed out yet that it is indeed temporal manipulation that's going on, but he does notice that the school itself has a really high level of security. There are a lot of human guards and all kinds of different mechanical contraptions, artifacts, all sorts of things to keep the school very, very secure on top of being in a remote, impossible to locate island. That actually is under the restrictions that if any student notices anyone from the outside has shown up to the island, they have to immediately report it, and those intruders are always dealt with very, very swiftly. So Teferi enjoys spending his time boasting, summoning blades to spin in his hand, while idly laying forth the truths that he has discerned about the Academy to his friends and basically anyone who will listen to him, because he likes to appear intelligent. Now, he's unsure whether Urza's paranoid or super vigilant. He's seen all of these things, all these constructs, but he doesn't know if this is actually a measure of a genuine threat to the Isle of Teleria and what's going on with the students, or if it's just that this incredibly intelligent and powerful old mage is also just kind of gone crazy and is paranoid. So Teferi doesn't like being nice, really. If you boil it down, he does not enjoy being pleasant with people. He enjoys cajoling, manipulating, and stressing out other people. He spent a fair bit of time hassling Karn about how Karn would be melted down when Urza was done with him, but he caused the worst problems for Joyra, who was another artificer on the island. She had the misfortune of being an 18-year-old attractive lady who Teferi is very, very much interested in. Now, as an 18-year-old, first of all, she's going to want nothing to do with a 14-year-old guy. And secondly, Teferi isn't mature for his age. In fact, because of all of Teferi's advantages, he's incredibly immature for his age. He's used to people being awed by him and getting what he wants in most cases. Even Master Malzra, the one who owns the entire academy, is impressed with Teferi. So he makes life a nightmare for Joyra. He's constantly trying everything that he can think of to win her over. It doesn't matter whether it's something like a threat, whether it's promises of riches, whatever it is, he will try anything under the sun, up to and including trying to brew love potions using her hair to win her over. So at the end of the day, Teferi cares about Teferi the most. Now, this doesn't mean that Teferi is a black-hearted, really evil individual. That's not the scenario. It's just that he has been given a lot of power and he hasn't learned enough empathy for other human beings at this point, right? But either way, it leads to both Karn and Joyra, who would be future friends of Teferi, to want nothing, absolutely nothing to do with him, to the point where at one point Joyra loses it on Teferi and rips into him in front of all of Teferi's friends, leaving him right on the verge of blubbering with his lip quivering and everything. Now that was a really hard scenario for Teferi, as he's not used to being treated in that way. Most of the time he just gets what he wants, and he kind of you know, the kid who slides through every scenario with no problems in school, doesn't matter what they do, they're going to do just fine. That's Teferi. So Teferi is he is essentially almost obsessed with Joyra because she represents multiple things. First of all, just the fact that she is a beautiful young lady, right? She is far more adult and mature. She is in the full blossom of her beauty. And so Teferi, having basically being able to conquer and dominate everything else so far in his life, finds her to be a big challenge. So he starts to focus on her more and more, and he noticed while he was spying on her that she would slip away at night. So he resolved that he was going to follow her. Now Joyra, she was fast and quiet and cautious escaping the school, but Teferi had the advantage of being a magical prodigy. So he had extra means at his disposal, including, even at his young age, he had already sorted out how to cloak himself in invisibility. So he's following her under an invisible cloak, essentially. It's not really a cloak, but, you know, under the cloak of invisibility magic. Now, she must have still somehow been able to detect his presence to a degree, because she kept stopping and like kind of looking around the way you would when someone is in your vicinity, because she could never pinpoint through Teferi's invisibility magic. So after a number of starts and stops of this nature, he follows her through the Hall of Artifact Creatures, which is a place that absolutely unnerves Teferi, because this is the place that houses all of Master Malzra's essentially not failed creations, but previous creations. So, for example, there are a number of golems that were the precursors to Karn that are all made to stand there. Basically, they're all deactivated, but they're standing there. It's almost like a mausoleum or a graveyard, but full of previous generation artifact creatures, and the whole place unnerved Teferi, but especially at night. So he steeled his courage, because Joyra was a prize worth, you know, mustering that for, and continued to follow her along. At some point, he lost track of her, and he just basically ran into a dead end. It was like, wait a minute, where did she go? So he's standing there, all despondent, thinking, okay, like, how did she manage to elude me? He just kind of stares down at his feet and notices, wait a minute, this grate beneath me, there's something different with what's going on. Joyra had tampered with the grating. Now, most people wouldn't be able to see through her magic, but again, Teferi, being the prodigy that he was able to figure out, wait a minute, this has been magically altered. It took him less than a minute to sort out the clever design that Joyra had come up with, and then he was out through the grating and back on her tail again. And all this was in this kind of off to the side, half-used. It was originally supposed to be a dormitory, but they switched it into a laboratory. But it still had some of the tunnels and things like that that would be necessary for a dormitory. And that's how Joyra had found this essentially escape tunnel to get outside of the school. So Teferi found the tunnel and he headed down it, basically using some sort of heat detecting magic to find the heat of her footprints and catch up with her. So at this point, he basically is outside and he sees that Joyra is using these crude little bird contraptions to distract the guards. Then she uses the opportunity when they're distracted to slip away. Now, Teferi likes the idea, but he prefers something a little more elegant. So instead of using mechanical birds to distract the guards, he actually goes ahead and summons a genuine real bird. He summons up a sky captain, and the real bird spooks the guards far more because they were familiar with the mechanical birds. Those mechanical birds that were being used by Joyra were actually something that had been banned at the academy. Students weren't supposed to be able to, or not able to, students weren't allowed to construct those. But having an actual bird swooping down on the guards freaked them out enough that one of them almost fell off the wall, and it made it very easy for Teferi to quickly chase after Joyra and get back on her trail. Now, once they were out of the sight of school, Teferi noticed that Joyra's sort of demeanor, instead of being kind of, you know, hunched forward and looking around all fearfully, she kind of straightened up and slowed down a little bit. She basically, in terms of, she didn't slow down. What I mean is she became less vigilant. She was headed off somewhere she really wanted to go. So instead of slowing down, she actually sped up to get where she wanted to be more quickly, which made Teferi very curious. And he was able to tail after her more efficiently now that she had kind of dropped her guard, right? So Teferi follows Joyra to this secret hideaway that he had no idea that existed. In his mind, he was exultant. Here he was, finding Joyra's secret. She was sneaking out of the school after hours, which is absolutely forbidden. So Teferi was picturing in his head, oh man, what am I going to be able to do with this information? What am I going to be able to get in exchange from Joyra for my silence? So that all turned to sour milk in his mouth when he spied that there was actually another man in the hideaway. Teferi had absolutely no idea who he was, but he spun away, just sick to his stomach over the thought that Joyra would be with someone else. And also, Teferi was smart enough to know, even at his age, that there was no way that he could reveal to Joyra now that he knew about her secret. Because if he did, what would happen is Joyra would just end up hating his guts. So what had originally seemed like a tool to manipulate her now was just the taste of ashes in his mouth as everything he wanted just kind of burned away. This was a huge moment for Teferi actually in his existence, because up until this point, he had always been convinced that no matter what, misdirection, cleverness, artifice, boasting, whatever it took, he would be able to acquire whatever he wanted in life. But at this point, seeing Joyra with this man that she clearly was very much into, it was a wake-up call. It told Teferi, okay, you're not actually going to be able to acquire things this way. Every time he had made passes at Joyra, she would only tell him to grow up. He was growing up, but it wasn't fast enough. What was he supposed to do? It's not like he had access to a time machine. That's literally what Teferi thought at this time, or at least he was thinking it for a moment, until a hand grabbed him and roughly slammed him into the ground. All right, my friends, that's where we leave off this portion of the story. I will have more lore coming for you next week, and actually there's been some lore peppered into videos throughout this week, so if you want to check them out, I encourage you to do so. Thanks for coming by, everybody. If you enjoy these lore videos, jump on my Patreon. That's where my fans are supporting me. I will see you all very soon.